Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. As you can probably hear, we have just pressed the record button. I hope that's okay with everyone. It is my absolute delight and a great pleasure to kick off Spin's series of events for 2025. So a very warm welcome to you all joining us today here in the live session and also watching the recording too. So today I have the distinct honour of welcoming Professor Brian Rappert and Dr. and also Anna Flamind to discuss Brian's new book today, which is the first of the series for the Secrecy, Power and Ignorance Research Network, or SPIN. Now, as many of you will probably know already, SPIN is a collaborative initiative between researchers based mostly in the southwest of the UK, places like University of Bristol, Bath, Cardiff and Exeter. But we've also got members across the world, across the UK, reaching as far as France, the US, Canada and so on. And the research of the SPIN collective, if you like, of researchers within the network tends to focus on the power and politics of secrecy and ignorance. And that's at the global, the international, the state, the societal, and also the personal level. If you haven't already, you can find out more information about the network and also, more importantly, about the exciting range of upcoming events this year on our website, secrecyresearch.com. And you can also subscribe to our mailing list to stay in touch or even join the network and find out about the events. Today, though, I'm really looking forward to hearing from Professor Brian Rappert about his latest book, Revelations, A Sociology of Uncovering, which I believe is due to be published by Routledge any minute now. Brian is a Professor of Science, Technology and Public Affairs at the University of Exeter and one of the steering members of SPIN. Something you might not know about Brian is that he is a practicing magician on the side. A recent line of his work has examined the relation between disclosure and concealment through undertaking an autoethnographic study of becoming an entertainment magician. So Brian has several skill sets related to secrecy and revelation. And I'm also very pleased to welcome Anna Flamind, who's going to act as an interlocutor or something of a discussant for Brian's book and presentation today. Anna is a PhD student at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. Her research looks into the politics of scandals, and by asking what do scandals do to politics, her research critically explores the relationships between collective participation, revelations, and the possibility of critique. Now, before I hand over to Brian, a note on the timings for you all. Brian's probably going to have around 15-20 minutes to speak, and then Anna will respond for about 10 minutes. And then we're going to open the floor to an audience question and answer, so a Q&A. So I warmly encourage you to post any questions that you have in the chat function at any point during the presentations. I'll collect them as we go and read them out later, but also be sure to mull over anything you'd like to ask in anticipation of the Q&A session at the end. So put those thinking hats on. But otherwise, I shall say thank you very much and over to Brian.
Very lovely, Claire. Thank you for that introduction. Let me just share my screen and hopefully that's there. Are you seeing that all right? Okay.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for that. Okay, so yeah, ta-da, right? Here we go. Yeah, I'm going to talk about this book, Revelations, that's recently come out. It's available on open access now, so it's on the internet, freely available. But yeah, if you wish to have a kind of whatever hard copy there, they'll be available soon. It's been an interesting topic to look into, this one of Revelations. I've been writing this book kind of off and on for maybe kind of 10 years or so. So it's really nice to have this opportunity to share it and to hear reactions from all of you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Revelations then. Well, what can we say about the notion of revealing? I think we can say it's a fairly kind of pervasive trope. You'll find it in politics. You'll find it in a lot of public forms of communication. My personal favorite is, since I'm a Guardian reader, I like to watch The Guardian, and I like to kind of count the number of articles that start with the word kind of revelation. and Yeah, anyway, yeah, this is one of those kind of articles that came out. It was around over Christmas, right? This idea of finding a kind of untouched civilization, a lot of imagination, yeah, can be associated with this, right? All sorts of different kinds of revelations. You know, stories about schools in England not being kind of fit for purpose. Who would imagine, right? We can find out revelations about celebrities too. I mean, this is common ground for kind of revelations, and we can look into the past or the present and so on, and we can be told all sorts of kind of whatever, maybe interesting things about people we thought we knew. We can reconsider how we knew them, etc. And again, like just another one of the examples of revelations that kind of comes up in the news. For anyone living in England, this probably isn't a revelation that the water companies are giving themselves big bonuses and not cleaning up after the rivers and so on. But in any case, it's not just whatever kind of left-leaning newspapers that get into revealing, although I think there is something about the Guardian in particular which has this kind of investigative kind of dimension to it. It's kind of what they're kind of striving for in terms of a lot of their work, right? But sorry to take some of you back in time. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of revelations that can come out, right? Okay, so what are we to make of this kind of movement towards revealing, this kind of desire to reveal? And for me, in a lot of ways, I kind of sum it up. It's about it's about an attempt to kind of grasp the world, right? When we say something's revealed, when we read something's revealed, we're we I say this kind of, there often tends to be a kind of play made that there's some secure kind of grasp of knowledge, that's at play, right? To reveal something is like, okay, now we kind of got something important, right? We found out something about a celebrity, we found out something about politics and so on. Okay, we've got it, right? And and that's, I mean, I think, you read newspapers and so on, and I would argue that kind of play is often at work in claims to reveal. But right, it's not just the world of public affairs where people make this kind of gesture. It's also common in academic writing. So, one of the the big names of sociology, 20th century, Pierre Bourdieu, talking about sociology and how does he characterize the goal of sociology. So he says here, the function of sociology as every science is to reveal what is hidden. In doing so, it can help maximize the symbolic, minimize, sorry, even the symbolic violence within social relations, and in particular within the relations of communication. Okay, but in any case, I mean, those of you who know him, right? I mean, he has a kind of, this very kind of strong desire to offer a kind of, maybe a kind of version of an objectivist sociology, not in a classical sense, but he's definitely wanting to kind of get a hold of something, right? And yeah, that's a lot of his work is kind of dedicated to this idea of kind of unearthing, right? This is what sociology does. It finds things which are kind of not manifest, kind of openly, hidden relations and so on. And yeah, if I could say this, we in this sense, right? I think it's fairly commonplace that academics make kind of gestures towards revealing in this. And for me, I mean, this raises a lot of interesting questions about how to approach revelations as a topic. I mean, is my purpose in writing a book about revelations to reveal the real story about them? Is it to unearth and give you a sense of what's kind of actually going on when we talk about revelation and so on? I mean, I try to avoid that in writing the book, but also recognize that in all sorts of ways we have a series of kind of commitments surrounding knowledge claims often. And even if we don't want to kind of try to get at this sense of what's kind of really going on, our arguments are often kind of infused with that kind of logic. So in the book, I try to approach revelations from I suppose, a spirit of kind of curiosity. how to talk about them, how to not talk about them. Yeah, so maybe just to start to kind of elaborate further the idea of revelation, maybe let's just make some very kind of preliminary points, like what's kind of going on in this space of revealing. And when you think about this, right, I think there's a lot of different kinds of things that can come into focus when we talk about revelation. So typically, right, reveal. If we take kind of just the base word reveal, that's a verb, right? But it's not just any old verb; it's a transitive verb, right? So there's some sort of object, right, that gets kind of that receives the action, and typically in Revelation, that might be something like a secret, right? Someone's got a secret, and now they're kind of revealing it. But reveal can also be a noun in the way that we might talk about an instance of unveiling some sort of fact that's dramatically disclosed in the world of murder mysteries or something. Okay, we can talk about the reveal and how that functions within stories. Revelation as a word is a noun, but it's a noun that refers to some sort of action, right? There's a kind of doing involved there. But it's also a noun that can refer to particular kind of forms of content. So if we think in terms of where revelation as an idea has been, kind of thoroughly addressed academically, and that's in theology as a field, right? I mean, you've got a definite sense there that revelation in that context, right, is about a particular kind of content. And then there's also related words that we might use in talking about all this, and like revealing, right, which can be a verb, it can be an adjective. And I'm saying all this just to say that there's a lot kind of going on in the kind of revelation space, and there's a need for us to kind of be clear about kind of what we're focusing on and how we're conceptualizing it. So our friends at dictionary.com, they offered a couple ways of thinking about revelation, and just right here, right? I mean, they're talking about an act, right? In this first definition, an act of revealing or disclosing, sure. But in the second, right, they're talking about the thing that's revealed, and a thing which is notable because it's striking, right? It's something that wasn't realized before. So that's bringing us kind of away from the act itself to more like what is being revealed. And so I think with this topic, like a lot of topics, like the way in which we might want to talk about things like secrecy, right? We kind of need to attend to how we're conceptualizing what's going on. And just by way of doing that and giving you a sense of, the way the book approaches revelation as a concept, I want to just, kind of delineate some of the ways in which we can alternatively think about revelations. Okay, so yeah, revelation, right? As you read in the dictionary definition there, it can be an act. Okay, so here's an act. An unveiling even. Yeah. I mean, what's sort of going on in this situation? I mean, there is an act, right? But it's not just something that a revealer is doing. You've got an audience here. You've got what's being revealed. You've got the way in which it's being revealed. So I think, just as a starting point, revelations are better thought of as a kind of interaction rather than as an act. And an interaction which is not just whatever social, right? But it's material, and needs to kind of be approached as such. To turn to the matter of affect. So again, like on the second definition that we saw from dictionary.com, right, kind of pointing to something about the revelation as being striking, right? I think when we talk about revelation, also there's this affective quality to it, right? It's not indifferent, right? When people reveal something, it's like there's a sense that it matters in some way. Okay, but then we can ask a lot of questions here, right? effect for who, right? In what respect? Do people kind of need to be moved, surprised, find something striking? Is it about the intentions of the revealer, and this is kind of what they're going for? Do we want to say that there's a kind of potential that it could be found striking, effective in some way? Um, do we want to say like, well, we'll talk about revelations when people should be moved? Like if they kind of got it, they would be moved, right? So, yeah, I mean, there's other ways in which we can phrase this question too, like, I mean, can we reveal in a boring manner? Can revelations be boring? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of anyway. I'm raising all this just to say there's a lot of issues to think through in talking about whether something's a revelation and how we define it. But if we can say that about affect, we can say it about the content as well. Again, like if we've got some bit of information talking about Thames water or whatever it is, right? And there's a message associated with that. Are we talking about revelations as a situation where people kind of could understand the meaning of what's being said, that they should understand, that the revealer has a definite sense of what they want people to understand and why it's important? You know, lots of kind of perspective based kind of questions we can ask. In terms of outcomes, the philosopher Gilbert Ryle talks about revelation as an accomplishment word, wants to reserve the term revelation for when, you know, yeah, when someone's been able to kind of convince someone of something, to kind of move them in terms of their views, right? That it's like achieved something. In some of the areas that you know, people in the spin network look at, I think, you know, you see that same kind of desire to have an outcome kind of based approach. So many ways of talking about securitization, for instance, as a concept, is about getting people to buy into some sort of belief. But again, like, do we need that in terms of talking about revelation, or is that going to be kind of too narrowing in terms of our focus? If we think about like secrecy as a word, when we're interested in secrecy, are we interested in an outcome it has on, you know, whatever those who are being kept from the secret? Do we need that? Usually people don't kind of adopt that kind of orientation in terms of the way it gets defined. If you look at like a couple of issues like lying and deception, I mean, people can lie even if you don't believe them, right? So say someone's lying, like, I know you're lying, right? But you wouldn't really say that about being deceptive, right? Someone isn't deceptive if they're not persuading you in some way, right? If you can see through what they're saying, then yeah. Okay, so anyway, again, lots of important issues going on about how we orientate to the terminology and how we're kind of defining the issues at stake. And then finally, just to say with regard to experience, so yeah, in theology, I mean, revelation usually is associated with transformation, experiential transformation. You know, your relationship to God, you know, has moved in some way, has shifted through a revelation. Again, like, is this something we need to bring to bear in terms of our studies? I mean, just to tell you that how I've orientated to these kinds of issues within the book is just to say that I've taken a kind of very broad definition of what ought to count as a revelation in terms of the way it gets, you know, defined in the book. And I'm interested in doing that because I'm interested in following out contest and how people dispute meaning, come up with different interpretations, the way they say, really? Like, in terms of looking at what's been revealed. Okay, so yeah, in the book, just to give you kind of sense of it, revelations are characterized as a charged making available, where charge indicates a lack of indifference. That lack of difference is ascribed to its kind of effective significance, but also its whatever epistemic significance. But again, like understanding, right, that these attributions are going to be highly, or they can be in many situations highly disputed. They can be multiply conceived and so on. And then kind of my job as an analyst or whatever is to kind of follow out the controversy, rather than necessarily saying that's a revelation, that's not. This is important, this isn't right. I'm kind of taking it as a topic in the way we often do in these kinds of studies. Okay, I mean, why is contestation important? You know, because in the case studies that I look at, it's there's this this kind of keen interrelationship. So let me say it this way, right? It's our variability, sorry, to perceive, right? To look at a photo or what have you, and to, you know, make sense of, okay, what's going on. That variability to perceive is how people distort and also kind of fake through visual evidence. It's our very expectation for authenticity in, say, artwork or autobiographies, right? That also brings a worry about whether or not particular accounts, particular images are kind of crafted or forged in some way. Okay. So our kind of our desire, our ability to go out and kind of see the world is the kind of very basis on which we can kind of dispute how we're seeing, how we're making sense, right? And that's what many of the chapters kind of look at. Okay, and maybe to give you a sense of what those words mean, and also to give you a sense of a particular kind of dynamic that I am interested in the book, I'm just going to kind of briefly recount one of the case studies that's addressed, and that's of the revelations associated with WikiLeaks, going back to 2010 now. So if you don't recall, in 2010, WikiLeaks made a series of disclosures, one about military logs in Afghanistan and then in Iraq. And towards the end of the year, it released a number of diplomatic US cables. I was, you know, I was very interested in following out how those leaks were depicted in newspapers, particularly those newspapers collaborating with WikiLeaks. And I've written about this elsewhere, but I think there was a, you know, very kind of interesting kind of dynamic associated with the leaks. Because on the one hand, right, you had these claims made that like we got it. like these leaks have like told us like what happened. Okay. And, you know, I mean, I'm not going to go through this in detail, but, you know, just whatever, you know, the headlines from this article, right? It give you a sense of like the kind of like empirical kind of certainty that was often attributed to the leaked material. So for instance, you know, the background screen you've been looking at, this is the interactive map that the Guardian produced based on the military logs from Iraq. We're looking at the center of Baghdad here, and basically each of these red points is a use of force incident. So yeah, you know, probably in most of these, right, there's been a death, or there's certainly been someone wounded. And on the back of all the leaks that came out, the Guardian was able to kind of produce this kind of, you know, visual display and so on. Anyway, they also produced a lot of stories about what was taking place, right? And even you know, encouraged readers to make use of the data themselves. So this was again, like, this was material that could provide a kind of foundation for making claims about the world. Okay, so that kind of discourse was definitely there, but what I was really interested in looking at this case was the way in which those sort of claims were often paired by claims pulling in a very kind of different direction. So within these very news stories, within other news stories in the Guardian, you know, at the same time, there were also claims made that, okay, well, actually, maybe, you know, okay, for certain, the military logs are going to be hard for anyone to make sense of. But more than that, they're highly unreliable in lots of ways. Journalists at The Guardian and elsewhere kind of dug into the details, you know, and okay, a lot of these may be a pretty questionable worth. They have a kind of meaning that's not readily apparent. You can't just go by what's said, you know, in the logs or in the diplomatic cables. You know, we're journalists, and our job is to kind of, you know, figure out what all this means. So on the one hand, you had this sense that the data was out there and it was available and people could make sense of it and kind of derive important knowledge claims. And on the other hand, very much kind of intermixed with this was this idea that no, no, you need to go back to the people who are doing the investigation to kind of find out what all this really means. And yeah, I was fascinated in this dynamic. Okay, but it didn't just end, or okay. So let me just say it in this way, right? So in this case, right, there's not just this simple kind of, I don't know, more empiricist kind of sense of like, here are the facts. There's also this sense of like, no, the facts aren't quite there. Okay, here we go. But it wasn't just in the news reporting in 2010 that this dynamic took place. It was also something that I thought was pervasive in the stories about WikiLeaks that came out afterwards. So many of the people who were involved in those disclosures, people at the Guardian, other newspapers, people within WikiLeaks, the collaborators, and so on. I mean, they all, but a lot of people involved came out with kind of stories behind the story of WikiLeaks. And these weren't just stories about human drama and personalities, although they were certainly that. They were also stories about the facts and what you could say on the basis of the 2010 leaks. And again, like this really interesting stage where a situation where many of these accounts, right, they kind of pull back from the ability to make definitive claims about the logs and cables and gave you this kind of view into kind of what was going on and all the kind of confusion and uncertainty about how to kind of make sense of what was made available. And yeah, in a way that kind of cast doubt on the kind of reliability of the claims that were being made in 2010. So it's kind of really interesting dynamic at play, right? People were offering kind of revelations about the revelations and doing so in a way that wasn't explicitly trying to undermine the kind of claims that came out initially in 2010, but was raising all sorts of questions about their status too. And it's not just that there were kind of stories about the 2010 revelations. There were then stories about like the stories that had been written. Julian Assange, has had multiple autobiographies or autobiographical kind of accounts of his experience written up by him, by other people, and so on. And really, it's just like it's a story that kind of keeps giving, right? Because even whatever, as of last year, you had these kinds of revelations coming out about those events in 2010. So yeah, there's this kind of interesting dynamic, this kind of ever opening up that's possible, with these stories, and I was kind of interested in that, right? Where there's this sort of there's this play for a kind of definitive knowledge and then a movement away from it. Okay. So what to say about that? So I mean, we've got a process here, characterized in different ways, maybe a process of opening and closing, right? Of kind of people being pointed kind of this way and that, right? And for me, right, like as I approach Revelation in this book, I'm not just interested in this dynamic of like, here it is, right? I'm interested in how the dynamic of here it is, but it's not here, how these two come together in lots of different kinds of forms. So, that's one of the kind of key dynamics that I try to trace out in the book. And, the basic point here, right, is that the lure of revelation doesn't just come from the act of exposing, nor in kind of placing things out of reach, right? It's the way in which this question of what's been made knowable can be revisited kind of time and time again. Okay, just a few more slides then to give you a kind of sense of how this plays out. Yeah, so the book, I'm interested in looking at lots of different cases. As I said at the start, this book emerged after a number of years of research, and there's just a lot of different topics in it. One of the topics I look at, for instance, is magicians and how they fashion stories about their lives. So it's interesting, right? I mean, magicians are deceivers. Right? That's their job, right? That's what they're trying to do, and kind of, everyone kind of knows it, right? So how is it that if you're a magician and your skill is in deceiving, how do you give account of your life, right? Is this a kind of straight account, like like you would find in a lot of auto biographies? I mean, you could do that, and some magicians do, but you probably you would want to strike a more kind of playful tone. Maybe you would want to encourage some sort of doubt within the readers about what they were actually being told, and maybe in that way you wouldn't just talk about magic or deception. You'd kind of do it in a way. So anyway, the book, one of the things it looks at is how magicians craft autobiographies of themselves, with this kind of acknowledgement that they're actually the thing that they're good at is kind of lying and deceiving people. And so within that, I'm interested in, okay, well, how whether and how magicians are interested in whether or not they're making a claim to be telling the truth. Some autobiographies are just like, kind of standard accounts, but some of them are much more ambiguous than that. And also, the world of magic, there are all sorts of people are motivated by all sorts of concerns about what kind of counts as good magic or proper magic, or where magic kind of goes too far and it becomes something, that you're promoting some sort of kind of, whatever kind of quasi beliefs, or just downright, you're promoting kind of downright lies. So how do magicians kind of draw a line about what's good and what's bad, in their autobiographical accounts? Um, Another area that I look at is art forgery. And again, I'm interested in these kind of flawed characters. In this case, the flawed characters are the art forgers themselves. Okay, again, like people who have made a career out of deceiving others. Okay, and now they want to write about it and tell the world. Okay, but this can create some problems which they would acknowledge, or that people would kind of see in these works. So again, like how do you craft a story, right, in those sort of situations about kind of what really went on in the past, if you're interested in talking about what really went on? And you know, a range of different art forgers have taken kind of different orientations to this, and this is something to look at. I wanted to look at in the book. Forgery involves a kind of visual element because a lot of it is about how do you pass something as over as fake. And there's a lot of other cases where I look at photographic evidence. So one of the topics examined is the photographic evidence for the moon landing. And again, a very kind of similar dynamic to what I've talked about already, right? Photographs, on the one hand, they can be treated as very fact-like, right? This kind of seeing is believing, it's there. Okay, but on the other hand, many people, in many situations, might have skepticism about photographs as whether or not they're reliable. What are they leaving out? What are they showing? How are they showing it? Have they been shopped over in some way, and so on? And one of the cases I look at, I say, is about the visual evidence for the Apollo moon landings. And what's particularly kind of interesting about this case is it's a kind of appealing to a kind of fact-like status of the photos, but asking the viewer to kind of look a bit closer. Okay, you'll see the facts, but not on initial appearance. You just have to look closely, right? Okay, so like I don't know, in this photograph, like what would you want to look at, right? So one of the things people who are casting doubt on this photographic evidence would point to is like, okay, well, look at this lunar lander here, right? Isn't it odd, right? Isn't it odd, for instance, that if you look under the thrusters, right, that prevented this thing from just kind of dropping to the moon's surface, right? There doesn't seem to be any kind of sign of any kind of disturbance there. But if you look sort of slightly, whatever, on the right in the screen, you'll see some footprints of some whatever, the astronauts and so on. So, like, like this is the kind of invitation, right? Like, what's going on? So, so yeah, I look at some of the controversies about this kind of visual evidence. Okay, yeah, and just to say, so throughout this, I'm interested in this kind of dynamic between a kind of this and a that, facts and appearances, surfaces, depth, reality, make-believe, right? And how do people going about trying to make sense of the world kind of put these different things together? And this is my own visual representation of just that there are a lot of different ways in which we might think about a this and a that and how they come together. Okay, so last slide, just in terms of the organization of the book, one thing I do is just try to break down different aspects of how we can understand what revelations realize and how revelations are realized. So, vestings, for instance, how are there, investments in photographs, in leaked logs, right? Like this is it, like we got it, right? There is that movement, but as I've said in the presentation, right, there's also this movement away of divesting. Okay, so how do these two things come together? Becomings, I'm particularly interested in there in notions of identity. Again, how do revelations bring sorts of some identities into kind of being, but how does the potential for revelations depend on certain kind of identities, people being authoritative and so on? How do revelations require certain forms of identity? Figurines, it's a term from process sociology, I suppose talking about how groups of people come together in relationships of connection and interdependence. And with this chapter, I'm particularly interested in like the conditions that allow revelations to happen, right? Can revealing happen in just any situation? Well, what the chapter does is to try to kind of look at some modern areas of controversy and to say, how is it that in some situations there is a revealing and in others there isn't? Splitting the whole book is permeated, and the way I've talked about already, right? Revelations are permeated with these kind of splits between like fact and fiction, inner and outer, knowledge, ignorance. And again, like I'm interested in how revelations split the world, but how splitting is also a prerequisite for revealing. And then another chapter 2 is staging. So, the management of space, time, audiences, place, all this, how are revelations made available through staging, and how revelations enable staging to happen too. Okay, so that's a bit of the flavor for the book, sense of an overview of the kind of topics that I'm looking at, and yeah, just to say thank you very much for your time and attention, and yeah, I think we're going to hear from Anna now, and wonderful, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you, Brian. Over to you, Anna. Unmute yourself.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you I would like to first thanks Elspeth for thinking of me and giving me the opportunity to read an advanced copy of Brian's book, and to Brian, who generally shared his work with me and us today. I just want to very briefly present the elements I thought in the book were really interesting to me and the audiences that might be interested in the book. And I have some further suggestions for discussions and themes that could be expanded upon afterwards. So as Brian says, and he started, we seem to be in an era where revelations from tabloid scandals to scientific breakthroughs dominate public discourse, and Brian's work is particularly timely, especially given the scant literature addressing the topic of revelations outside of theology. It was a real pleasure reading Revelations, a Sociology of Uncovering. One of the main strengths of the book is its wide appeal, as we've seen in this presentation, and the varied literature it speaks to, while at the same time remaining an important contribution to secrecy studies. Brian's approach of blending reflections from magic and performance studies to cultural and media studies, via the discussion of memoirs, autobiographies, documentaries, but also more in-depth analysis of hoaxes, conspiracy theories, and whistleblowing practices, made Revelation a really engaging and fun read. So I thought it would be really important to stress that it is a really fun book to read. Brian offers a rich and nuanced examination of the concept of revelation and the process of revealing in our contemporary societies. Beyond the surface allure of the term, the book dwells into the mechanisms, implications, and paradoxes inherent in the act of uncovering. His text is not merely an exploration of disclosure as an action, but a sociological meditation on how revealing shapes and is shaped by the worlds we inhabit. Brian places relationality at the heart of revelation, and as such succeeds in offering a dynamic and dialogical understanding, one that eschews sweeping affirmations and ontologies. This is thanks to his conceptualization of the cycle of revelation and the co-constitutive elements that form his approach. Indeed, Brian's feat with this book is the elegant conceptual framework he has developed that invites us to think with and through revelation. The cycle of revelation, which he presented in the last few slides, divides the act of revealing into interconnected processes: vesting, becoming, figuring, splitting, and staging. Each chapter dissects these processes, providing a lens to understand revelations not as isolated acts, but as dynamic, interdependent phenomena. The cyclical model transcends simplistic notions of revealing as a one-time act of making the unknown known, allowing his analysis to sustain at the same time a level of depth and clarity. In the vein of more recent work on the social and political dimensions of secrecy, the book will resonate with sociological critiques of transparency and secrecy, particularly those addressing the interplay between revelation, meaning-making, and expertise. As such, Brian advances a compelling case for studying revelations not as singular isolated events, but as multifaceted, context-dependent processes laden with meaning and contradiction. For instance, Brian's exploration of WikiLeaks shows how revelations are both meticulously staged and inherently susceptible to skepticism and revision. We're promised the realest truth, only to be told that behind the scenes lies another truth that is actually the real truth. As Brian demonstrates, revelations produces knowledge, but more importantly, they participate in the formations of identities, communities, and norms. As such, Brian's analysis challenges readers to think critically about how revelations are manufactured, received, contested, and validated. What I really liked is how Brian offers seemingly simple definitions. For example, revelation, as he has stated before, is defined as the making available of what was previously otherwise. And despite the simplicity of that definition, the thinking about revelation keeps all its texture. We are invited to explore Brian's propositions ourselves, to embed our thinking in stories in which things are never what they seem to be. We come away with an enriched understanding of revelation, one that succeeds in never foreclosing the field of inquiry, but equips us with the tools to explore how reality is made and unmade through knowledge claims about what appears to be and what really is. Some of the themes that I would have liked maybe Brian to talk about a bit about more, or maybe he can do it now, and this is really biased because it comes from my own interest, from my own research. But I found Brian's conceptualization of revelation as charged acts characterized by their ability to evoke strong, effective responses very convincing. In my own work on scandals, I talk about the emotional charge and how such a charge compels us into caring. I would have been really interested to hear more about how he understands emotions or this charge act in relation to literature about emotion and affect, and how maybe this could have been explored further in the specific context of revelations, specifically as it relates to the emotions that revelations seem to enact, such as deception, but also the emotional charge that accompanies acts of faith and belief that relate to revelation. Another avenue I would have loved to read more about, but again, this is extremely biased, and would have been more on the theological underpinning of revelation, which Brian does address, but maybe not in its full specificity. Revelation, and this is of course the strength of the book, is broached through a very broad lens, but at times it may be felt a bit too broad. So if Brian would like to talk a bit more about how he understands the distinction between exposure, revelation, and disclosure, I think that would be really interesting for me and for us to hear. And one way in which I thought maybe the distinction between exposure, revelation, and disclosure could be specified would be to reinject a bit of theology. to help specify the unique dynamics between revelation, doubts, and proof, especially as so many examples that are brought to bear in the book, from magicians to art forgery to moon landing hoaxes and WikiLeaks, can be read as willful declarations of faith and subsequent attempts at managing the administration and or refutation of the proof. So these are some of my suggestions for discussions. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Anna. It was absolutely brilliant. While Brian takes a moment just to have a think on those two questions, one about emotions and one about more theological and sort of definitions of revelation, I invite anyone in the audience to have a think about any questions they'd like to ask. Selfishly, I have one too, but I'll let Brian answer those two excellent questions first. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, no, thanks for those comments, Anna, and the care and attention given to the book. And I look forward to being able to kind of re-listen to what you said, because I think you you said a lot of things better than I did. So that'd be great. Yeah, the relation between exposure, revelation, and disclosure. Well, it's an interesting one, and there's so much going on there. Okay, so what to say about that? So disclosure, is disclosure always about making things plain? Well, I guess it's a question of how we want to define things. But I think in secrecy studies kind of look at notions about exposure, like exposure and disclosure, and say, okay, well, oftentimes we can hide through what we tell, right? And just as when we try to keep something secret, oftentimes that's kind of giveaway. Okay, so I guess the basic point here is to say that the way I approach revelation is a little bit the way I approach secrecy too, right? I mean, they're not just kind of mere opposites of each other, because they're both really kind of negotiate in terms of what they entail. And yeah, if we don't think of secrecy in some kind of more absolutist way of just hiding, okay, but that it can involve forms of exchange, like maybe a number of anthropologists would think about secrecy is how we share things, not how we kind of keep things, because they're interested in the kind of forms of communication that surround secrets. If I want to share a secret to Claire, I'll say, hey Claire, don't don't tell anyone, right? But So yeah, so I guess I'm not going to provide an answer to the question in terms of how to elaborate it, because I don't have that kind of with me now. But here's the condition that we're in, right? Where we can see all these concepts is highly negotiated and involving what they are not, right? And if we think that they can all involve what they are not, then well, first of all, probably don't want to draw sharp distinctions between them. But also, how we define them is going to be very situational. To give a kind of an example of that, I've since this book was written, went through the publication process, I've written a book about exposure and magic, and magicians are very preoccupied with this idea of exposure. Someone would find out their methods, and this would be terrible because the magic would dissipate away. But magicians aren't really all that very clear often on what they actually mean by exposure. Is this something the magician does? Is this something the audience experiences? Is this within the context of the kind of commercial relations that often are associated with teaching magic, performing magic, where there's the relationship between a buyer and a seller, and then you have to think about what's appropriate within that kind of relationship. Yeah, anyway, so sorry, all I'll be able to do for that particular question is just to give you a sense of the problematics involved. Yeah, but anyway, yeah, it'd be great to see if there's see if there's any other questions. Yeah,
does anybody would like to raise a virtual hand and ask a question? Otherwise, I'm gonna possibly use my or abuse my chairing rights here, because I did have a question, if I may.
But Claire,
unless you,
sorry,
yes, go on.
I think Giovanna
Very good.
raised a question.
Yes, go ahead. Giovanna, go first.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian and Anna, for this conversation. I was intrigued, like Anna, I mean, as Brian would suspect, about the comment about emotion. And I was thinking, I mean, it's just off the top of my head, but as Brian knows, I'm very interested in emotion and affect. And it did strike me, yes, that of course revelation in the sense of revealing the alleged truth is very like striking, as you said. But then I was wondering about the other cases, about the arrows pointing in the two directions and how, I mean, it's really just a comment rather than a question, but how these different dynamics that you were pointing to, this complexity, it really comes with different affects, right? The revelation is not anymore this like, aha, but it becomes like a And so there is a really interesting affective dynamics to these different aspects you've highlighted. And I don't know if that, because I'm not a sociologist, but I don't know if that could have also relevance for further inquiries into, the implications of revealing or calling something a revelation, because obviously when we are affected, then that affects how we behave, how we understand, interpret. So yeah, I don't know. I guess I'm just asking about, I know, like Brian, you like the so what questions, so okay, so we have all these different types of revelations. What does that mean in terms of how people respond to something that is revealed? And obviously they can be affected differently, it seems to me, given the different natures of these revelations you've highlighted. But then, is this of relevance for any societal, political study? I'm not sure, but just wondering whether that's something anyone here has thought about.
Yeah, sure, great. Thanks for that, Giovanna. No, sorry, I couldn't resist the opportunity. So that's a shock revelation. So that's my wife there, who's a philosopher of emotions. So she's asking this question. Yeah. So okay. So how to approach this? I mean, I suppose I have a number of reasons why I became interested in Revelation as a topic. I mean, one, because it's this interesting counterpoint to secrecy, and that's something I studied for a long time too. But also, from my own kind of whatever kind of personal point of view, this kind of move to the facts, right? And kind of, I don't know, someone banging on the table, right? Like we got it, right? I think, when there's talk about revelation, there's also often an effort to make something very solid, or maybe very big, or maybe very kind of distinctive from whatever, something else. That might be a self trying to distinguish from others. It might be what we knew before from what we know now, and so on. So I mean, definitely for me, one of the points of studying revelations is to see these kinds of entanglements that we can have, the ways in which we can get kind of locked into certain kinds of forms of thinking, certain kinds of investments. Okay, but like the story is complex too, right? Because it's not, as I was saying in the presentation, right? It's not just a one-way movement here, like, oh yeah, so this is important, right? The dynamics can often be very fraught or varied or something like this. So then we get into the more kind of allure side of revelations, and the way in which we are investing not so much like maybe in what is revealed, but the revealing itself, right? And yeah, I mean, anyone who has maybe thought about peering into a door, like a whatever, what is like a lock for a door? What were they? Anyway, a keyhole. Anyone who's thought of kind of peering into a keyhole, or who's looked at some gifts and thought how great it's going to be, opening these up and kind of imagining kind of what's inside, right? I mean, there's all kinds of investments too associated with the kind of want to reveal. And given the pervasiveness of revelation as a concept, I mean, I think these are matters of interesting preoccupation, right? I mean, there's a lot of attachments there's a lot of attributions associated with revelations. And if we kind of hold too tightly, or maybe if we don't hold tightly enough, right, we can kind of lose what's going on. So part of what I'm doing in this book, and part of the reason I tried to kind of strike a kind of playful note in it, is to bring up this kind of curiosity of like, how are we orientating to what's being revealed, what's kind of coming up for us effectively, and to try to kind of make that into a topic throughout the discussion. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Brian. Chris has got a question in the Q&A section, in the chat section, but just before I do, I'm conscious that Anna might have to disappear, so if she does, I'd just like to say thank you again, Anna. If you do need to disappear, please don't need to apologise, that's absolutely fine.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just paraphrase Chris's question briefly. He was just
Sure.
curious, or two questions. The first was, did you choose the cover picture for your book? And if so, what motivated your choice of the painting? And he was also asking a little bit more about impression management, which is something I think he particularly enjoyed about the book, and whether you could say a little bit more about that. His question's in the chat, so I'm sure you can see, but he's asking, what do you understand impression management to pertain to, and are there interpersonal examples of impression management, or is this something that exists solely at the macro level at communication for media, government and military? So two-part question there.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the cover, yeah, I was really pleased with the cover. So yeah, the cover is one of these trick of the eye paintings, that I was able to reproduce. Yeah, I mean, I chose it as if that was kind of part of what was asked. In terms of why did I choose it? Because I'm trying to get at this sense of like, kind of it's there and it's not. So the painting is a scene of flowers, but what's also painted as part of the painting is a curtain, right? And this idea that you're kind of opening the curtain to what's there, and if you see these sort of paintings in real life, right, it can be sometimes hard, the way they're set up and so on, to distinguish between, like, was that curtain painted or not? So you got to walk up to it, and yeah, there's just that that they're going for that kind of effect. And that for me, that kind of struck this idea of trying to reveal about revelations, and I suppose it serves as a kind of is it a caution to the reader? Is it an invitation for the reader, to kind of open up what's inside? The book's called Sociology of Uncovering, right? And you got to open the cover, right, to read it if you've got a physical copy, right? So anyway, I'm going for these kinds of kind of levels of like kind of whatever resonance or alignment, okay, between the painting and how I'm thinking about the contents of the book. In terms of the question about impression management, oh yeah, definitely this is interpersonal. So I'm very much influenced by the work of Erwin Goffman, sociologist, very very prominent in looking at how people manage information about themselves and the kind of conditions under which people are necessarily kind of trying to negotiate a sense of who they are through negotiating their relations with other people and vice versa. And I think the way the book looks at that in the main is like the stories that people tell about themselves. And yeah, as I kind of hinted at, I'm particularly interested in autobiography because classically anyway, that would be a genre where you think like, this isn't just this is a genre where it's not just like a relation to the past, like, that's important. It's like, no, people want to tell you like what happened. This is, but of course there's a lot of ways to think about authenticity and yeah, so part of the book is then about, okay, how do people variantly present themselves? So I looked at some of the cases that I already mentioned, but I draw on the work of Elspeth too, who talked about special force operators. They have their own problems in talking about what it is they do because of restrictions of a kind of military nature, organizational restrictions and so on. And so there's this question there again, like here's a whole genre where people are trying to make a claim about like what goes on in special operations and the rest of it, but sort of can't talk about what's going on. So how do you make a so I mean those are the cases. So yeah, I mean very much I would see it, whatever any kind of level you want to draw in terms of where impression management counts.
Brilliant. I'd like to collect a couple of questions. I know Elspeth's got her hand up. If I could just read out the question from Owen, and then I'll hand over to Elspeth. So Owen's asking basically a question about change. So to read out the question, thinking, for instance, about your descriptions of WikiLeaks and sort of revelations on revelations, do you think there's an intensification or shift in revelation at the moment? For example, are we living in an age of revelation? Or are the investments you identify fairly stable contours of world order? Is there something at stake here? Is there something new now that wasn't there before? Or is this something fairly stable? That's the first question. And then Elspeth, please.
And I'm annoyed with you, Claire, for getting Owen's question in first before mine, because I have almost exactly the same question, which is to sort of ask, I haven't read, I've read the introduction, but not the full book yet. And I'm similarly interested to know, are there multiple forms of revelation? Is our relationship with revelation changing? Is revelation, does it present itself differently in different circumstances? And again, sort of maybe thinking about Lindsay's work on oracles and who or what is empowered differently to reveal and how that changes over time. Thinking about the trouble we have with revelation at the moment, thinking about American politics, US politics, and how revelations about, say, Trump's transgressions are failing to land. So this is kind of linking in with Lisa's work on exposure versus revelation. So across the book and the different cases, or is there a story to tell about our changing relationship to revelation? Or is that maybe something that we as a group should be thinking about a bit more?
Okay, yeah, great. A difficult question to answer. How are you going to put into some sort of relation notions of continuity and discontinuity and so on? And there's lots of ways to characterize this and to get into it and so on. Okay, but maybe just to say something about my starting motivations. So part of like a deliberate I'm going to do this in the book was like I'm not going to get into an age of revelation argument because I think that's fairly commonplace, and I also think that there are ways in which modern technology, right, can be seen as kind of enabling all sorts of practices that didn't exist in the past. So what I made a concerted effort to do in the book was to kind of draw out lots of historical examples where you can see a kind of, whatever, the same, sorry if you can't see me with it. I'm doing these air quotes now, the same kind of dynamics at work. So I mean, we can talk about revelation today in the context of, information communications technology. But if we go back to, centuries past in Europe, and we look at the printing press and how the ability of people to produce kind of how-to books, like, how to do, how to make jewelry, how to mix metals, right? I mean, there was a whole period in which that kind of genre, kind of came out, and there were people then who were speaking for what all these books kind of really meant and what you could really do with them. And I mean, so a lot of the dynamics you could find around today about trying to give some sort of inner secrets and so on. I mean, you can go back in time and it rhymes, right? Whatever historians say, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. So there's a lot of rhymes you can find in relation to revelation. So anyway, that was kind of my motivation. But of course, you say, like, are there shifting times and practices? And then, I mean, you'd have to say, well, yeah, there's got to be then kind of movement within that. One could make the argument, right, that, and the argument has been made, by some people, who've looked into, U.S. foreign policy post 9/11, and this idea of talking about, did the U.S. have secrets in terms of the war on terrorism? Was it doing practices which which it maybe didn't want to talk about. And at least one of the kind of strategies that was identified was that, you know, there was a lot of kind of preemptive revelation in that case. Donald Rumsfeld, others, you know, kind of in a sense openly admitting what wouldn't have been openly admitted so much in the past, just as a way of, you know, kind of deflecting any kind of concerns that came up. So Bredich has a article about that. So anyway, I mean, we can talk about those kind of areas where, you know, there's maybe like a strategic effort to kind of do revelation work, or we can talk about the way in which revelations can then kind of give form to other revelations and more revelations and so on. And, you know, that's a story of WikiLeaks, but it's, you know, there's a lot of other stories in the book in which that's discussed. So I guess, you know, situationally, you know, it's kind of all to play for, but in terms of thinking about big kind of macro, like would I use the word post in any of this or something like that? It's like, no. So the book doesn't get into any of that kind of like times are changing kind of arguments. But yeah, anyway, as I say, situationally, there's much at stake.
Thanks, Anna. Does anybody else have any other questions? Are there any other points anybody would like to raise? I think that draws us to a natural conclusion. So I'd just like to say, first of all, thank you again, Brian, for a fab presentation. I am chomping to get into the book, and Anna's interlocution of it was really, really good. So yeah, it's just encouraged me even further to go and get a hold of a copy. And I'd also just like to say thanks to Elspeth and to Evelyn as well for the sort of organisational heft behind this event. So it was a real pleasure. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And don't hesitate to check out more on the website for upcoming events, because there's a really exciting but slightly secretive, perhaps yet, series of events coming up any minute now. So have a look on the website. Thank you very much, everyone.
Enticing, Claire, enticing.